Martha Moxley loved keeping diaries. Something about putting a pen on paper and starting her entry with "Dear Diary" made Martha, well, happy. It was like she was talking to a best friend. She'd gossip about boys, school, mean teachers, vacation plans, anything. But now, her diary was being skimmed for something else. After her diary made it into the hands of police, every single word, every person's name, and every date in Martha's run-of-the-mill teenage diary was being analyzed. The police were looking for clues. They needed answers, because in her own front lawn, Martha was murdered. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If this is your first time here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. There's not a bunch of drama or speculation, just fact-based true crime. So if that's your thing, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It's free and it just lets you know when I post new videos. Martha Moxley, originally from San Francisco, California, moved to Greenwich, Connecticut in 1974 with her family. The family of four lived in Bellhaven, a quiet but affluent neighborhood where there was zero crime. Even though it was a community filled with people who kept to themselves, Martha was not one of them. She was outgoing and made friends easily. In 1975, Martha was in high school, and she was having the time of her life. Just across the street from the Moxley family lived the Skakels. Now, the Skakels were a pretty big deal. They were actually cousins to the Kennedys. See, the aunt of the 7 Skakel children was Ethel Skakel Kennedy, the widow of former U.S. Senator Robert F. Kennedy. Even though the Moxleys and Skakels were two families you wouldn't typically see intermingling, the Skakel children got along well with Martha and her brother John, spending time in tennis clubs, having fun, and just being kids. Martha was specifically close to 2 brothers in the Skakel family, Tommy and Michael Skakel. They had a really close friendship and would spend tons of time together. But little did any of these kids know that their friendship was about to fall apart after one fateful night unlike any other. October 30th, a day before Halloween, is known as something called Mischief Night in Greenwich. Basically, kids would go around their neighborhood and cause, you guessed it, mischief, throwing toilet paper on the trees, cars, backyards, or any public property. Kids in the area just loved to make a mess, but in all honesty, it was just harmless fun. It wasn't like they were running around breaking windows. They just loved TPing people's belongings. Well, this seemingly harmless night would take a very tragic turn in no time. Martha was on her way to the Skakel house, and she and the Skakel kids got into one of the many cars that they owned, a Lincoln, and drove around the neighborhood. It was reported that Martha and Tommy Skakel, who was 17 at the time, had gotten a little too close to each other that night. After some time, one of the other Skakel brothers asked if he could take the car to a cousin's house to watch the premiere of Monty Python's Live Circus. Michael allegedly also left with the brothers to watch the premiere too, leaving just Martha and Tommy alone. The last official sighting of Martha was of her and Tommy getting physical and, quote, falling behind the fence together at around 9:30 p.m. This was just 30 minutes after Martha left home. But the next day, Martha wouldn't come back home. Her parents got extremely worried. Martha's mom, Dorothy, went to the Skakel house and was greeted by a hungover, shirtless, and sleepy Michael, who hadn't seen Martha since last night. The neighbors were baffled, and detectives swarmed the Moxley house and neighboring areas. Well, it wasn't long until one of Martha's friends, who was assisting in the search, found something. It was a young girl with red hair lying beneath a tree, obviously deceased. But Martha had blonde hair, so it didn't make any sense. Well, it only took detectives a few seconds to register that the hair on this girl was not dyed red. The girl's hair was stained red due to her serious injuries. The young girl had suffered from severe trauma with brutal injuries to the head, and the murder weapon, or pieces of it, were found near her body, which was a 6-iron golf club. Tragically, the body of the young girl was soon identified as Martha Moxley. An autopsy revealed that she'd been struck with a golf club multiple times, causing said golf club to break in the process. Someone had taken out their anger on Martha. It looked like a crime of passion, and now Martha had lost her life. Horrifically, the detectives found out that Martha was actually attacked near her driveway, but was later dragged to the tree, leaving an eerie trail behind. This all took place right in her own front yard. What could this girl have possibly done to someone to be so violently bludgeoned like this? Well, when the detectives looked closer at the murder weapon, the pieces started to fall into place, quite literally. The lone golf club belonged to a set of 6 clubs owned by none other than Ann Skakel, Tommy Skakel's mom, who was also the last person to be seen with Martha before her life was taken. The detectives were dumbfounded. Was Ann really behind Martha's attack? This only meant one thing. It was going to be a long investigation, and I'm not exaggerating because it took years upon years before police had answers. The investigators got to work on gathering information about Martha's relationship with Tommy and the rest of the Skakel siblings. Now, according to friends, Tommy had feelings for Martha, but they weren't reciprocated from Martha. How did the detectives find this out? Well, through Martha's diary. In it, she wrote about how Tommy always tried to make moves on her, putting his arms around her and just making her uncomfortable. This entry was dated just a couple of weeks before Martha's murder. Friends also said that Martha was close and friendly with the Skakel boys, but nothing romantic ever came from it. Everyone else kept their distance from these boys because they were constantly in trouble, but Martha was trying to be friendly with them. The Skakel siblings came from money, and a lot of it, and they were unsupervised most of the time. They were the definition of spoiled, privileged children. In Martha's diary, she even contemplated ending her friendship with Tommy and Michael because the latter was so rowdy when he got drunk. And keep in mind that Michael was also just 15 at the time. So you can tell that the kids could do whatever they wanted, and ever since their mom, Ann, passed away from cancer, things only got worse in the Skakel household. The dad, Rushton, was always out and around, leaving the kids behind with an army of servants and nannies to throw grand parties at their house. The investigators obviously suspected Tommy to be involved in Martha's attack. After all, he was the one who was last seen with her. But Tommy had an alibi. According to him, he went back to his house a little after 9:30 a.m. to work on his homework, and his tutor corroborated this story. Ken Littleton was a newly hired tutor, and when the police talked to him, he said that Tommy was with him at 10 p.m. watching TV. According to Ken, Tommy looked normal and wasn't shaky or frightened at all. But soon after the Skakel's lawyers got involved in the case, Ken was mysteriously fired from his job, and his life came crashing down from that point on. He began abusing alcohol and illegal substances and even resorted to committing petty crimes. Some people theorized that Ken knew more than he was letting on, but the investigators didn't believe that Ken had any reason to harm Martha, since the two were practically strangers. So the police found no evidence of Tommy being involved in Martha's murder. He had an alibi, and that was that. So Martha's case dragged on for years and eventually became cold. There were no leads, and things slowed down to a stop. That wasn't until Rushton hired a team of his own investigators to look into the case. They compiled a private investigation report known as the Sutton Report, which conveniently got leaked to the media in 1995, and it was that moment when the focus shifted from Tommy to another person. His own brother, 15-year-old Michael Skakel. Michael had told the investigators that he came home after watching the premiere with his cousins at around 11:30 p.m., and he went to bed. But in the Sutton Report, he said something entirely different. He claimed that around midnight, he climbed up the tree that Martha was eventually found beneath and peeped into Martha's window. She had no idea that he was there, and this kid was being a top-tier predator. Because once he got to the top of the tree, well, he started taking care of himself, for a lack of a better phrase. It was just gross, honestly. But this revelation got everyone thinking. Why would Michael lie to the police? And why would he come out about this now after all this time? It turns out that lying ran in the family because Tommy also lied to the police about going straight home after 9:30 to get his homework done. He was actually with Martha for 20 minutes, but he conveniently left out this detail because Tommy thought that it would make him a prime suspect. This is also why people suspect that Tommy threatened Ken to provide an alibi for him. But some students from Elan School, an educational center for troubled teens, came forward with a confession of sorts. They claimed that Michael had confessed to murdering Martha. One of the students said that Michael kept bragging about, quote, getting away with it because he was, quote, a Kennedy. This was downright unbelievable, and the police had begun to take notice. 3 years after the Sutton Report got leaked, the prosecution requested a one-man grand jury to review the evidence. After 18 months of going through heaps of evidence, it was decided to try Michael Skakel for Martha's murder. Michael was eventually arrested on January 9, 2000, and it was decided to try him as an adult. His trial began in May of 2002, a whopping 27 years after Martha's murder, which occurred in 1975. The scene outside the courthouse was chaotic. Press, journalists, the public, and security were everywhere. It was a very high-profile case. A cousin of the Kennedys getting tried for murder. That's front-page news. Michael then hired Mickey Sherman as his defense attorney, who was a lawyer turned media personality. Well, the trial began, and the lead prosecutor, Jonathan Benedict, presented the evidence against Michael in court. He stressed that Michael was jealous of his brother Tommy getting all of Martha's attention, and since the two brothers were neck and neck when it came to competition, they fought for Martha's affection too. Michael even detailed in his autobiography draft that he wanted Martha to be his girlfriend, so the motive was clear. Michael got angry at Martha for giving his older brother attention, and that caused him to snap and ultimately drive Martha to her untimely death. Since the crime was committed in 1975, there was little to no DNA testing, so witness testimonies and alibis were all that everyone was going to get. And speaking of witnesses, Michael's confession about murdering Martha with a golf club from the student at Elon School was also read out in court, since the kid who made that claim had since passed away from a drug overdose before the trial even began.
Oh my God. If I tell anybody that I was out that night, they're going to say I did.
In this voice recording, when speaking about Martha, Michael had mentioned how he was terrified of getting caught. Now, the way this was presented at the trial made it appear as though Michael was afraid that he was going to get caught for murdering Martha. But things weren't that simple. The defense refuted this voice recording, stating that the prosecution took things out of context. They claimed that the fear Michael had spoken about in this voice recording wasn't what it seemed.
I pulled my pants down. I masturbated for 30 seconds in the tree. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I hope God never saw me. Then I woke up to Mrs. Moxley saying, Michael, have you seen Martha? I was like, oh my God, did they see me last night?
Michael wasn't afraid of getting caught for murdering Martha. Instead, he was actually referring to what he had done in the tree that night. He'd been up in that tree outside Martha's window, staring at her and taking care of business, so to speak. And according to Michael, that's what the recording was about. He was afraid of getting caught with his pants down, not being caught for murder. Regardless, the trial ended with closing arguments from both sides, and everyone was on the edge. Was it even possible for such a close relative of the Kennedys to be convicted for murder? Well, they were about to find out. Everyone was waiting for the jury's verdict, and in June of 2002, it was finally revealed. Michael Skakel was found guilty of murdering Martha Moxley almost 3 decades after her passing. The prosecution was looking at a sentence of anywhere from 20 years to life, but after the guilty verdict, things only got messier. Michael's cousin, Robert Kennedy Jr., was certain that the prosecution took Michael Sutton's investigation statement out of context, and he was determined to get Michael out of jail. Now, for some context, this is the same Robert Kennedy that you've probably been seeing on the news lately, the guy that's trying to get all the artificial food dyes and whatnot out of our foods here in America. Well, Robert Kennedy Jr.'s accusation was based on more than just the edited voice recording. He also threw Michael's entire confession out the window. Remember that confession that was given by the Elon School student who passed away before Michael's trial? Well, it was revealed that before the trial, the student, who was a grown man at the time, had been under the influence of drugs when he made that claim. So according to Robert Kennedy Jr., his testimony was unreliable. Therefore, Michael couldn't have been the one to have ended Martha's life, at least not as far as the evidence leads us to believe at this point. So 8 months passed, and Michael was behind bars serving his sentence. But everything changed when Robert Kennedy Jr. received a tip that would lead the case in a completely different direction. See, according to the tipster, a man named Tony Bryant, who was Michael's classmate from Brunswick School as well as Kobe Bryant's cousin, knew details about Martha's murder. So Michael's new team of attorneys, Hope Seeley and Hubert Santos, went to Tony and videotaped his version of events on the night of Martha's murder. According to Tony, one of his friends named Al from New York had taken a serious interest in Martha the night that they went to Greenwich. Al was also jealous of the other guys spending time with Martha, and Tony recalled what Al said to him during one of his episodes of jealousy. Al had said, quote, "I don't understand why she's spending time with those guys when she could be with me." Tony claimed that he, Al, and another friend named Burton were at the Skakel house to hang out when they saw the golf clubs, and immediately out of nowhere, Al and Burton said they wanted to hurt someone. Tony, on the other hand, put his hands up because he didn't want to be involved, so he left, leaving the two guys to do who knows what. Fast forward to the next day, and the three met up, and Al and Burton confessed that they had done something to someone last night. They never mentioned Martha's name, but in hindsight, Tony believed and was certain that it was Martha because the news of her passing was everywhere. When asked about why he didn't come forward with this information earlier, Tony said that he was scared he'd be framed for involvement in an unsolved case, and it was actually his mom who stopped him from saying anything. So with this information, in 2005, Michael's attorneys filed for a request for a new trial. They were certain that an innocent man was in jail, and the real perpetrator was on the loose, living his life. When the trial took place, though, Tony refused to testify without immunity because he thought that he'd be held responsible. Because even though he didn't do anything, he did bring the two people of interest, Al and Burton, to Belhaven, and that was not a good look. So in the end, only Tony's video statement was played, and the conviction was upheld, ruling 4-1. The jury was not convinced by Tony's videotape, deeming it to be incredible. But that didn't stop Robert Kennedy Jr. from fighting. In 2016, he wrote a book titled Framed, in which he went into detail about Tony's version of events, and even took help from Martha's diary, confessing that she did see Al, Tony, and Burton. But the problem is, in Martha's diary, she never once mentioned Tony, Al, or even Burton by name. She waltzed with a couple of boys at a dance, but her dance partners don't remember seeing Tony, Al, or Burton anywhere, so the people who Robert Kennedy Jr. believed were most likely Tony, Al, and Burton, well, it's just unconfirmed. Now, even though Al didn't want to be dragged into this mess, his attorney said that the accusations were completely false and baseless. Al's attorney firmly stated that Michael's defense team was trying to scapegoat Al because of discrimination and vulnerability because he was a person of color and the defense's client was a powerful and influential man on top of being a cousin of the Kennedys. This entire case just became so strange so fast. Everyone is cousins and relatives of someone famous and wealthy, and they're all equally shady, and it's just bizarre. Also, Al's attorney didn't back down from throwing Tony under the bus. Tony, as far as anyone knew, was a man with a criminal history, having been arrested for armed robbery, and at the time when all this drama happened, he was serving a 7-year-long sentence for tax evasion. So it is the messiest of messy situations. You have power, influence, big names, and murder all in one place, and it's gonna be a disaster. But the next person to take the court spotlight was Michael's ex-attorney, Mickey Sherman. After the whole Tony and Al debacle, Michael's defense attorney turned to his ex-attorney. Why? Because, according to them, Mickey had not represented Michael properly in the trial. Basically, Mickey was accused of basking in his 15 minutes of fame instead of doing his job. Michael also accused Mickey of taking hefty lawyer fees and not doing his job to defend him properly in court. So in October of 2013, this led to Michael getting a new trial by Connecticut court judge Thomas Bishop. Martha's loved ones, as well as the prosecutors, were taken aback by the decision. They thought that everything was over and done with, but that wasn't the case. Still, Martha's family hoped that the state would win in the end. Judge Bishop ended up ruling that in a case like Martha's, the defense should have taken more time to investigate, paid more attention to the tiny details, and had a more comprehensive and coherent defense plan. The whole back and forth with Mickey also brought light to a very eerie turn of events, and that was the involvement of Tommy in Martha's attack. The two brothers were now pointing fingers at each other, blaming each other for Martha's murder. Tommy was officially the last person to see Martha, and he did lie to detectives too. So it left everyone feeling unsettled that maybe Tommy was involved in Martha's murder. But Michael was also being shady with his version of events. Well, within a month, in November of 2013, Michael Skakel was released from prison on a $1.2 million bond. His release conditions also included wearing a GPS monitor, having no contact with the Moxley family, having periodic on-phone check-ins, and being prohibited from leaving Connecticut. Michael, being the amazing, law-abiding citizen he was, broke the last condition almost instantly when he relocated to Westchester County, New York, right after his release. But somehow he was never really punished for this. Regardless, by December of 2016, the Connecticut Supreme Court reinstated Michael's murder conviction with a majority of 4-3, saying that the previous defense was sufficient. So now he was right back in prison. When Michael appealed for reconsideration 5 months later, in May of 2014, the Connecticut Supreme Court agreed that Michael deserved a new trial. At this point, I think I'm about as confused as you probably are, because this is getting insane. But by the end of this new trial, Michael was set free. The courts determined that there just wasn't enough evidence to convict him. And I can't say I disagree. Now, obviously, there was a lot more back and forth and a lot more evidence than what we could just cover here, but based on what I've read and heard, I don't think Michael should have been convicted either. Now, was he the killer? Maybe. It's a very, very distinct possibility. But we can't throw people in prison based on possibilities, even though that's kind of what they did anyway. We have to convict criminals based on evidence and evidence alone. And as it stands, pretty much every piece of evidence in this case is circumstantial, and that's terrible. It is horrible that after multiple decades have passed, 50 years, that the Moxley family is still begging for answers. It is appalling to believe that it's been 5 decades since this girl was found just steps away from her home, brutally murdered, and still no one knows what really happened that fateful night before Halloween. A lot of people firmly believe that no matter what, Michael Skakel is guilty. Some also believe that Tommy is the murderer, because if you remember, Martha didn't like Tommy romantically either. So it's assumed that Tommy snapped at Martha for rejecting his advances and ultimately ended her life in a fit of rage. After the fact, he lied to the police about not being with Martha and later threatened Ken to provide an alibi. But a number of people have another theory, and it's all the more terrifying. They believe that both brothers, Michael and Tommy, were involved in murdering Martha. Both boys lied to the police. One of them was last seen with the victim, and the fact that the tutor Ken was fired after giving Tommy an alibi and shambling his life after the fact just screams guilt. People speculate that Ken was pressured into providing an alibi for Tommy, and the guilt of keeping a secret ate at him. No one has come out with any clarification of this theory, and I want to stress that these are all just assumptions, but just thinking about Martha's murder this way makes everything more sinister. It's so terrifying that money and influence can buy almost anything, and it can scrub the names of wrongdoers clean and portray them as innocent. After all this time has passed, all who's left in Martha's family is her brother John, who's currently in his 60s, and he's still trying to heal from the painful and unbelievable loss. Pretty much everyone else in the family is gone, but he still wants to know what happened to his sister, and why. Why did someone take this innocent girl's life? That is the biggest question of all. Why? Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Leslie England and Ryan Coy. Ryan, I wanted to do your name a second time because I kind of messed it up the first time. I think I called you Ryan Corey or something like that, and I'm sorry for that, Ryan. But if you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public, and it is a great way to support the channel and help out. And I really appreciate those of you that have decided to do that. If you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video, or find the link down in the description. And don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are also now available, so you can grab one of those from a link down in the description as well. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.